Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week, and I hope you're all excited about the long weekend ahead. If you are tuning in live here on Behance today, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We have Chris and Harshal and Cornell, Mushumi, if I mispronounced the name, I do apologize. Umacorn, Andy, Masayu, Sam, Robert, Felipe, and Boo. Great to see all of you. Hope you're well. Hope you're excited for another Masterclass. This is Masterclass number 65. Been at this for 65 weeks. It's a lot of free content for all of you to soak in. And some of you have actually been around since week number 1, and I cannot thank you all enough. We also have 6 masterclasses before Adobe MAX. 6. We're almost there. It's going to be a good time. We've got someone from India. I'm pretty sure it's like midnight or 2 in the morning or something like that in India. Thank you for staying awake for me. Guatemala and Colombian living in France. Cool. And Stockholm, Chicago, Cameroon. A lot of places I haven't been, but hopefully once I'm able to travel again, I'll be able to go to all of these fun, exotic places. All right, so let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. And before we dive in to what we're going to be creating today, Adobe MAX, like I mentioned, is very, very close. 6 masterclasses away, which means it's just about 6 weeks away. I think it's a little bit less than that too. max.adobe.com. Thank you, Sam, for posting that. Head over there. Register for free. Once again, this year it is completely free, completely online. And as always, we're going to have amazing updates across all of our applications, including Adobe XD. I've been very heavily testing some of the features that we're going to be releasing in just a few weeks, and I cannot wait to get them all in your hands. We also have some great sessions and speakers. So if you hop over to the sessions section, and then you can definitely browse all these different categories, but most of you are here for UI and UX. There's me. I have to update my headshot though. It's outdated. But Marissa's gonna be there, Jessica, Fabricio, and then right over here, see all UI and UX sessions. There are, I don't know how many, but there are a lot, 47. And then if you search me, Pinsky. I'm gonna be delivering the What's New in Adobe XD session at Adobe MAX. Good stuff. Good stuff coming. All right. So, Masterclass number 65. It's 12:30 a.m. in India. Thank you for tuning in at 12:30. Are you using the Camlink 4K? So I'm using currently the Sony a7S III connected to an external GPU of some sort. I don't know exactly what it is, but it does the job. It's pretty good. So what are we going to be doing today? I just posted on Twitter. If you're not following me, twitter.com/Pinsky. And we're going to be designing out this recipe experience, which can be adapted for iPad, web, mobile devices, all sorts of different things. It's going to be a lot of fun. Definitely throw some suggestions in the chat. We're going to be tailoring this to avocado toast because why not, right? Umacorn has added it to her schedule. Thank you. And Bernadette as well. Awesome. Can't wait to see all of you there. All right. So let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD and we're gonna get going. We're gonna start from scratch. And I think for this one, usually we start with either iPhone or web, but maybe we'll mix it up a little bit and we'll start with an iPad artboard. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's maximize this window. And by default, we have this nice portrait view for an iPad, right? But I may want to tailor it more towards a landscape view. So with the iPad artboard selected right over here to the right hand side, we can choose the orientation, landscape or portrait. I'm going to just go ahead and boop, switch it over to landscape, and we'll name this recipe. And we're going to just dive into things. So as you saw on that sneak that I posted, we really want to focus on the imagery and the obviously the recipe, right? But the images are really what's going to kind of drive you into this app and get you really excited about it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my good old rectangle tool and draw one out across the artboard. Now, sometimes I would go all the way to the bottom or all the way, full width. I'm going to leave a little bit of space right in this area here, just in case we have additional content down below that we want to scroll to. It'll allow us to help illustrate that with additional elements and, the difference between an image and maybe a background color. So we've got our image up at the top. And then if I hop over to Finder, I have a ton of images of avocados, because of course I do, right? All of these were grabbed from Adobe stock. We have some wonderful ones. It'll just make you incredibly hungry. I don't know about you, but I want some avocado. I'm allergic to avocado, but I do eat it from time to time. I suck it up because it's so good. So this recipe in specific is going to be focusing on avocado toast. So I'm going to just grab this image here, drop it right into place. And all of a sudden, it's looking pretty good, right? Now, the background of this artboard is currently white. And for the most part, it's not bad. But I might want to bring in, as I'm designing this experience, I might want to bring in some of the colors of avocado and bread, toast, that sort of thing, right? So I do have the artboard selected, and then under the appearance section in the properties inspector, I'm going to open up the fill, and I might want to go for, I think if I do green, it might be a little bit overdone. So we might want to go for maybe like a orangish, brownish, yellowish, I don't know what you call beige. It's probably beige, something like that, right? Like a little bit of a beige look. And if we do decide to add elements on top of this area or even down below, we'll be able to easily add some text on top of it. If we were to go for something like green, obviously it's overdone, right? But it also creates a little bit of accessibility issues when we start adding text and things like that. So I think beige could work pretty well. All right, hey Katya, great to see you. Great to see all the new folks. Old folks, not old as in old. Maybe some of you might be, but people who've been around for a while, regulars, there we go. It's like Cheers up in here, we all know each other. All right, so we have our nice large image, we have our background, and now we want to start building out that recipe experience that kind of gives a preview of what the recipe is going to look like, and then maybe a button to actually start cooking. So over here to the left-hand side, I'm going to grab my rectangle one more time and draw one out somewhere in this area right here. And I want to make sure that we have some nice padding on all the sides. So I'm going to go for about 16 pixels on the left. And as you can see, as I'm dragging, or if I hold down my Alt or Option key and hover over the left-hand side, you're going to notice that it tells me really nicely that we have 16 pixels. You can also, of course, drag out guides and all that fun stuff. This is 18, so I'm going to bump it up a little bit. And then down here, it's 20. So I can either, drag this down using the handle right here at the bottom, or I can hold down my Command key and use my arrows. So that's 17 and then one more. You can also hold down Command and Shift and then use your arrows to enlarge or shrink by 10 pixels at a time. Bernadette says, I'm old. How old is 31? Well, I'm 34. I'll be 35 in a few months. So I'm right there with you. I definitely feel old from time to time. All right, so we have our container, right? But again, we might want to start bringing in some colors. White isn't too bad. We're going to probably stay in that realm, but we may also want to bring in a little bit of color. So if I go back to the beige section, just a little bit. We don't want to go too much with this particular element, because if we go too beige, as you'll notice at the bottom here, it'll start to blend in a little bit too much, which we don't want. Of course, you can add things like drop shadows and borders and all that fun stuff, but I'm just adding a touch of color, right? Here's the beige and then white, right? Beige, white, very, very subtle. And Felipe says, try something gray. You can absolutely do gray as well. So either one of those will work. And then maybe just to separate a little bit from that background, we may want to add a bit of a drop shadow. Now I talk about drop shadows all the time. One thing you don't want to do, if you've never heard me rant about shadows, you don't want to do this. Don't do that. A lot of newer designers, and even some experienced designers, they look at drop shadows as a way to separate an element from whatever's behind it. And that's absolutely true, right? But you don't have to go this overdone with your shadows. So, Jennifer, wait, did he say drop shadow? Everyone's like, oh no, let's leave. Yeah, I did say, I just need to make a video about drop shadows, and whenever I get to a drop shadow during my stream, I'll press like a button on my stream deck and it'll just play the video and then we'll be done with it. It'll be great. Subtle drop shadows. Yes, I agree, Cornell. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring in some of the color of the background. You can either eyeball it or you can sample this color. Now, obviously, when you sample it, you're not gonna see it, but then you can bring it down a little bit, and just that alone, that could be enough sometimes. Now, I might wanna blur it a little bit, so instead of 6, I might wanna go to either 8. 16 might be a bit too much. It's not bad, but you have to ask yourself, do you want some of that drop shadow to kind of hit this image over here? You probably don't, right? Finally, your voice is good. Yes, I was losing my voice yesterday. Drank a lot of coffee, not coffee, I did drink coffee, but water, tea, all that fun stuff. And yeah, I'm all good now. So, that will definitely cause a bit of a problem. So what you can do in this case is you can actually, bring your color a lot darker, but still in that general beige, orange, reddish range, and then drop the opacity. So if you take a look at the bottom here, we basically have the exact same result. But if you now take, hold on. Come on, go down. That'll do. All right, so back here is before when we chose that specific color, right? And then you can notice down here and then up here. But if I go back to when we drop the color darker and then drop the opacity, we essentially have the same result down here. But up here, we don't have that weird, beige spill. So definitely a trick that you might want to consider when you're working with shadows. And then the final thing I might want to do to this particular container is looking a little bit sharp, and we might want to go a little bit playful with this application. So we can round out the corners a little bit. 8 isn't too bad. It's very subtle. We can probably go up to 16. If we zoom out, it's not bad, but I might want to stick a little bit more subtle with this one. So maybe 8, we can even break, if we're break the 8 pixel grid and go maybe 12, just to kind of round it out a little bit more. And I'm going to very quickly play around with the shadow just a touch more, maybe bring it down a little bit. And then drop the opacity just a touch more. So if we take a look at the preview, it's a nice subtle shadow. We're not going for anything too crazy. Nice and subtle. All right. So now at the top, what we might want to do is kick off this section by explaining what this recipe is. So I'm going to grab my good old text tool, shortcut key T, and simple avocado toast with tomatoes. Did I spell that right? I did not. There we go. Now I spelled it right. Now, in terms of the styling of this text, I'm going to center it. And Jennifer is asking, when does the rounding almost become playful, like Comic Sans? That's an interesting question, Jennifer. And I don't know if there's a right answer to that. It really depends on what you're designing. If you're designing an experience like a recipes application or a gaming experience or a social media application or something like that, then rounded corners are typically okay. Now, you probably don't want to do something like this, right? That will just make adding text kind of difficult. It just looks weird. And also, if you're designing a website that's something a little bit more serious, like a funeral service or something like that, right? You probably don't want to go too playful because it's a funeral, right? So you have to keep those things in mind. In this particular case, 8, 12, 16 might be okay. I think if we go to 24, based on the size of this artboard and container, it's probably a little bit much. And then of course, as I showed, that's probably not going to do it. So I'm going to stick with around 12 right now. 8 would probably be ideal in this situation. Very subtle, but you know, it looks pretty good. All right, so we have our text at the top. Now, in terms of styling, I might want to go a little bit creative with this. Of course, I can stick with something like Helvetica, which is fine. I can do something a little bit, you know, like Avenir Next, which is also nice. It's very simple. It's a sans serif with some fun elements to it. But I may also want to explore what a serif typeface may look like. And something like Kansas New, it's fun, right? Avocado toast, it's kind of traditional. It's playful, right? So let's try this. And then maybe for the weight, semi-bold could work. And then color-wise, we can go a whole sorts of different ways because we are using a background that is mostly white. It has a little bit of, you know, orange and beige in it, but it's light enough that we can get away with a lot of different colors. So we could go green. That absolutely could work. We could go, ooh, that's a nice, look at that. That's a nice color. It almost looks like, you know, seasonings or something like that. We could do that. And that looks kind of nice. So I'm going to bring this up a little bit just to enlarge it a touch. And then pop it at the top. There we go. I'm kind of digging that. I don't know if I want to go too dark because I kind of like that brownish, almost like a burnt brown kind of color. It's kind of nice. Richard says, that's what I had for breakfast, avocado toast. I am jealous. I like that. Bernadette, is this a digital/print menu? It could be. This is probably mostly, you know, a digital recipe book of some sorts. But yeah, that one is nice. I agree. It's a kind of a nice, it's a softer color, but it's not too harsh. It could look good. And then below this, we may want to dive in with maybe a description. So instead of clicking like I did previously, I might want to click and drag like this. And this will give us a nice text box to work with. But as you're going to notice, it's pretty large, and we definitely don't want that. So what we're going to do in this case is, one, we're going to drop the size of the text. Let's try 16, see what that looks like. That could work, depending on how many lines we have. We'll get to that in a moment. And then, you know, I've talked about this quite a bit. The serif typefaces are pretty good when it comes to headers and larger text layers. But when you start getting a lot smaller, they become a little bit more difficult to read, right? So in that case, I try to revert back to something more on the lines of the sans serif. So something like Museo Sans is pretty good. We can potentially get away with something like Museo Slab, which is, you know, kind of a serif typeface, but it's not as stylistic as Kansas or New Kansas, or Kansas New, I should say. But let's try the Museo Sans. And then I'm going to drop the weight to maybe 700 or 500, somewhere in that range. And I may want to drop the size as well. Now I do have a description over here, just so I'm not wasting time. I'm going to copy that and then pop it in here. And we're noticing it's kind of large, right? And I'll get to the coloring in a second, but it's a little bit large. I might want to pull this out a little bit just so we have some extra room. And I'm holding down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on Windows to pull from both directions at the same time. And then let's drop this to about 12 and see what that looks like. That could work. Now, one thing I'm noticing, two things I'm noticing, is the line height feels a little bit squishy. You know, the text size is 12, the line height is 14, but it still looks a bit squishy. So I might want to just bump this up a little bit. Let's try 16. It just gives a little bit more breathing room. Doesn't make it as squishy and claustrophobic. And then the second thing I'm noticing is that the brownish auburn, or whatever you want to call this color at the top looks great. But when it comes to the body text and description, it may not be working. So in this case, we may want to drop to something a little bit more traditional. We can still keep it in the range of that color, but just drop it a little bit, right? Something in this area here. And you're noticing I'm not going too far down to this area here. I'm still kind of adding a little bit of color in there, but more on the darker side. So at a distance, when you're previewing it, it looks, almost gray or black, but there's a little bit of that brown color in there that it kind of just adds a nice soothing feel to it. Did I say umber? I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Words are hard sometimes. All right. Now, how many lines do we want to? I think 4 lines is pretty good. Now, in this case, what we might want to start doing is adding some padding around here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these layers here. So I have the container, the description, the header, and I'm going to pop them into a group. And we can turn this into a component a little bit later on as well. Group, and I'm going to call this recipe preview. And I'm going to turn padding on within the properties inspector. We can also turn stack on, but may not need that just yet. We can always turn that on later. And if you're new to XD and you're not sure how padding works, essentially when you turn padding on, it's going to look, number one, is there a background layer? And the background layer is the object at the very back of your layer stack. If there is, it's then going to assign that as a background, and then it's going to look at all the layers above it. And it's going to look at the padding around it, which is why you're seeing this very large number at the bottom, because it's doing what it was supposed to do, right? It recognized that this shape here is the background, and then these layers on top are what it's going to use to determine the padding. And there's this big section at the bottom. So in this case, we might want to go, let's try 24. You know what? Let's try 24 pixels all the way around, right? And I'm going to make sure that this is positioned like that. Now, obviously, it's shrunken this down quite a bit, but as we start adding additional content, it's going to automatically expand, which is super nice. Sam is asking, how often do you, I lost it, hold on. How often do you drop the opacity of the description text, or do you always change the color? That's an interesting question, Sam. So I try to stick with solid colors as much as I can, not only because it's a little bit easier to work with, but it's also going to make our developers' lives a little bit easier. The last thing they want to do is, assign a specific color and then have to worry about opacity. However, what I will say is if you're working on, let me give you an example. If I decided to add a background blur to this shape here, let me bring some of the color back in, right? If I did something like this, which I probably wouldn't do in this situation, but if I did do something like this, I may consider dropping the opacity, only because it's going to allow some of the color from that background to come in through the text, which could add a nice experience, as you're seeing here, right? It's almost like adding a blend mode. So we have a little bit of color variation to that text, which is consistent with that background container. Now in this case, I probably want to keep it solid, but that's probably when I would start looking at opacity. Or if I'm lazy and I just want to darken it, I'll just press like the number 5 and we're done, right? But if I'm being specific, that's the way I would do it. All right, so moving on. Underneath this particular text layer, what we might want is a very quick section to go over maybe a few key details about this recipe, how long it takes to make, how many calories, how many people it might serve, and maybe if there's like a community of people who are rating these things, it might be a star rating, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the good old rectangle one more time and draw out a container, something in this area here. I can always adjust the size later, especially if I'm going to be adding padding. Now, color-wise, white is probably what we're going to end up going with, right? But what we can do is we can start adding in some additional elements to help pop it from the background. Because if you take a look, it's blending a little bit, right? So one, I'm going to round out the corners a touch. We can do something like 8, possibly. Maybe we'll drop it back to 6. And then I'm going to add a bit of a drop shadow. And very similar to the one at the bottom, we're going to pull in a little bit of color from the background, maybe drop the color, and then drop the opacity. So it's nice and subtle. Let's bump it down on the Y. Let's blur it a little bit. And that could work. What's with the typo? Do I have some typos? I probably do, to be honest. I haven't read through this, but there's probably some typos in there. Or, oh, maybe Birdie.That's making typos. I make typos all the time while I'm designing. Is your design going to be responsive? I mean, it could be. We can definitely, if we have time, we probably won't, but we can definitely adapt this for web and mobile as well. And then possibly, to give it a little bit more of a playful style, we may want to add a bit of an inner shadow on the inside. And I might want to go on the bottom. So I'm going to bring the Y into the negative. Let's drop the blur to either 0 or 1. And then color-wise, we're going to stick in that same range, right? I'm not sure how much I'm liking this. I'm probably not, but we'll see. Very subtle, just to kind of give it a little bit of a bevel. I don't know if I like that. But it's something to play around with, right? It's not bad. It kind of looks like it's a little bit 3D, kind of pops it out a little bit. It could work. Maybe. We'll revisit that. We'll see how that looks. And then inside here, we want, we want to keep this very simple, right? So if I actually go ahead and hop over to Nucleo, which I use all the time for my icons. Let's go ahead and look for something like a timer. Font Awesome 6 usually has some pretty nice, or I can go for, let's say, clock. Let's see. This one over here looks pretty good. It might be a little bit too thick. Let's see. If I bring it down to this size here, I think it's a little bit too... I mean, it's not bad. Okay, let's try that. We will try that and see what that looks like. I may actually want to pull in some of these colors. So I can either pull in that color there or this color here. I don't want to use too many colors. And as I'm going through this process, I should probably, hop into my document assets, add some colors in there. That way I can very easily just apply these colors with a simple click. And then below each of these icons, we're going to put some simple text like 15 minutes, something like that. And we're going to make sure that the color is consistent. I don't know about that color. I think darker could work. Let's see. Sam is saying, when rounding the corners of a rectangle inside of another rounded rectangle, where did it go? Hold on. Let me move this over. Or you just eye the change so it fits. From what I've done, I usually don't use the same number. Yes. So I've gone over that a few times before, but this, because we have so much padding over on the side here, it's not a great example, but let me go over here just to show all of you what Sam's talking about. So over here, if I round this out to, let's say 16, right? And then I want another shape on the inside. I can duplicate it, shrink this down. Let's change the color so we can see it, right? We have about the same amount of spacing around. But if you take a look, even though the radius of this inner shape is 16 and the radius of the outer shape is also 16, visually it looks off. Some of you may be able to see it, some of you may not be able to see it. It just doesn't look like it really fits properly, right? So usually when you're creating another rounded shape inside of a rounded shape like Sam was talking about, you just want to grab that corner and just pull it back a little bit. And there's often not really a perfect answer to this. You really want to eye it, right? So 12 in this case works pretty well. It just makes it visually look a little bit nicer. So hopefully that's what Sam was talking about. Outside dev teams want us to provide, is this a common... So Andy's asking, outside dev teams want us to provide Figma rather than XD. Is this a common request? It really depends. I've said before, Figma's wonderful, XD's wonderful, Sketch is wonderful, everyone's wonderful, right? Use all of them, but ultimately you have to use what your developers and product team is wanting to use, right? So try them all out, see what works best, and ultimately, if your dev team demands Figma, use Figma, right? It's great, but I personally love XD, but some people love Figma. A lot of it's personal preference. All right, so this is looking, selected the wrong shape. So this is looking pretty good. I'm gonna group this. This will be called time. And then we essentially want to do a few more going across. So the next one we might want is for calories. And I struggle to figure out exactly what like a calorie icon is. From what I've seen in other designs, a lot of people use like a flame of some sort for calories. It's an interesting choice, but hey, we'll run with it. And I guess let me know in the chat, what other icons could work for calories? I don't want to put like a scale, because that's kind of, I don't know, it's a bit strange. There we go. And then bring that over. And this is, let's say it's 900 calories. And the next one is how many people that this particular recipe could serve. So let's try person or people, or I think I was actually users. So something like this could work. These icons are very large, but they're also vectors, so they shrink down quite nicely. View. Now, one thing that you might run into as you're designing experiences like this is, in this case, thinking about recipes. Some of them might be for one person, some of them might be for multiple people. So you have to ask yourself as a designer or a UX designer, whatever it might be, do you want, in addition to the text changing, so right now it says one person, we could do two people, right? Do you also want that icon to change, or do you want to keep the icon consistent? I like having a consistent icon, people, right? And then down below it says one person. But in some cases it might make sense to just have one person up here. And then if it's more than one person, you would have this icon, right? Something to consider. And then finally, we might want, or maybe we can just do like 4.9. And then we can either create a star or add a star from our icon library. I'm a little bit lazy, so I'm just gonna grab a star. Of course, you can use the polygon tool and create your own star. But sometimes it's one of those lazy Fridays and you just want to add a star quickly, right? All right, I'm going to go through and group some of these elements. Whoop. And then name them stars, and then people, and then calories. All right, let's see, burning calories. Maybe that's why they do it. That's possible. I guess it would make sense more for a fitness application, but yeah, I guess that could work. All right, so what we're gonna do is we are going to, let's move this to about 24 might be too close to the edge, but let's try. And then on this side, we might want to do 24 as well. Let me just get rid of these decimals. All right, and I'm going to select all of these elements here, including the background. I'm going to place all of that into a group, and I'm going to call this, let's just call it like quick look or something. And then for here, I'm going to turn a stack on within the properties inspector, just like that. And what that's going to do is they're going to look at the distance between all these different elements, so time, calories, people, and star, and it's going to set the padding. Now, because I didn't do a very good job at spacing them out to begin with, all the padding is different. But we can go ahead and do something like 32, and it's going to automatically space those out, right? But I might want to go a little bit further, and I might also want to add some padding on the sides as well. So right now it's at 24. Let's try 32 on each side. And then I'm going to increase the, there we go, something like that. 40 could work pretty well, right? Okay, that could work. And I might want to just jump in here and actually maybe drop the, because visually, another thing you might run into if you're starting to get fancy with things, right? The padding on this object, 14 on the top, 14 on the bottom, right? If you take a look, it almost looks like there's a little bit more padding on the top. And that's because we have this very subtle ridge at the bottom where we added that inner shadow. So depending on how visually off that looks, you might just want to drop the padding by like 1 pixel or so. And visually it might help a little bit. All right. Andy is following up. Internal team has been using XD, but our contractors are pressuring to provide prototypes in Figma. Just curious if we should adapt and use both. I mean, I'm always on the side of using as much as you can, just so you know all of them, because if you're working with different developers or different clients from time to time, some may want XD files, some may want Figma files, some may want Sketch and InVision and all that fun stuff, right? So it's always good to know all of them. For prototyping, I personally like Adobe XD better because it has a lot more prototyping features. I find it a little bit easier to use. Adobe MAX is next month. We may or may not be introducing more prototyping features. You never know. But you know, it's always good. It never hurts to know all of them. All right, so we've got this section here looking pretty good. And then down below, we may want to start listing out the ingredients. So let's go ahead and type out ingredients. Now I do have that centered. I don't want that. I'm going to left align it. And in this situation here, we may consider going back to our serif typeface, because this will be a larger section, right? Now, I'm going to add this to my character styles. I'm going to add this as well. And I can just name these, let's say description, and we'll do header. Now, if I were to apply the header text over here, I'm not completely feeling it for a few reasons. One, I don't think the color, did I spell ingredients? It looks weird. Did I spell it right? I think I did. Okay. The color should be probably on the darker side, similar to this, right? And it's probably a little bit too large. So I'm going to switch the color over and let's drop the color, size to, let's try 18. I think that could probably work. And it's big enough that a serif typeface, we can probably get away with it, but we may also want to explore what Museo Sans looks like, right? So sans serif, serif. Tricky, right? But the nice thing is, if you do add these things to your document assets, you can very easily update them super quickly across all of your artboards if you needed to. All right, so now down below ingredients, we're gonna start actually listing out these ingredients, right? So let's go ahead and draw out our rectangle, and we're probably going to house each of the ingredients inside of a rectangle. You don't have to, you can do it inside of a larger rectangle, or you can just kind of list them out like that. But we're gonna kind of run with this style that we have at the top. It may end up being a little bit too much, but we're gonna see. I'm actually going to select this element up here. I'm gonna copy it, Command and Control C, and then I can paste the appearance right over here. Now, inside of this, we may want a few different things. Number one, the ingredient itself, or a picture of the ingredient. Now here's a perfect example of both of what I was talking about and Sam was talking about. If I were to round the corners to 6, again, visually, it just doesn't look right. So I would have to bring this back to possibly about 4, right? And then again, because we have that little ridge at the bottom, it looks like there's more padding at the top. So I think for this particular shape, we're gonna do away with the inner shadow. We'll keep the drop shadow at the bottom, at least for now, we'll see what happens. But that inner shadow was just gonna cause way too many problems. So we have an image on the inside, and then over on the right, we can start adding the actual ingredients. And for this area here, I would definitely stay away from a serif typeface. I think that looks pretty good. The Museo Sans, the sans serif typeface looks pretty good. And I'm also thinking, and I love kind of just talking these things through in my mind, because I basically do this when I'm not streaming. I think the brown, even though it's a nice dark brown, I think it might be too brown in this situation, right? So I may, for this, drop it even more to something a little bit more dark, right? And then I might want to drop the weight a little bit, possibly. I don't know, we'll see. And then maybe there'll be a description of what exactly, how many avocados or how many slices of whatever it might be, right? 1 plump fruit. I don't know how you describe an avocado, but we're going to run with that. And for this, it's subtext, so we're going to drop the weight even more and possibly the size a little bit. And then maybe we'll just bump this up a touch so it's not too dark in that area, right? I don't know. I don't know. I do not know. I'm thinking this entire thing is a little bit too wide. So I'm going to actually bring this inwards a little bit. And of course I can use padding as well. I probably should have enabled that. Just so that we don't have too much spacing. Let's go about 8 pixels. Maybe a bit more. Possibly. This is designing, people. It's like I can spend hours just kind of up, down, left, I don't know, zooming in, zooming out. This is what we do all day. This is the life of a designer. Okay, so we're gonna leave this for now. And then I guess, actually we'll get to the images in just a second. And then over to the right-hand side, maybe you might be using this application as you're shopping, right? So this could also act as a shopping list. So over here, what you might want to add is maybe just a very quick, something like this. Maybe I'll inset it just a little bit. And then color-wise, I might be able to actually sample the background color and then add a little bit of a border. That's kind of the background color, but a bit darker. And this will be almost like a checkbox, right? So you'll be able to just kind of click into here, it'll do a little check mark, and then, it'll let you know that you bought it. But how do we actually show what that check mark looks like? I don't think avocado should be plump, rather ripe. Oh, ripe. See, this is why I love designing live. Ripe. There we go. 1 ripe fruit. Perfect. All right. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and name this check mark. Check, I don't know. Check is fine. It's not really a box. It's more of a circle. So what we want to do is create a component that has both states. So I have this one shape. I'm going to press the plus button right over here to the right to create our component and our default state. And then I'm going to press that plus button one more time and let's create a toggle state, which will automatically wire up those two states together. And this will be called checked. So the first thing we might want to do is actually create that check mark. So I'm going to dive into the component. Let's activate our grid command and control apostrophe, I believe it is. And then boop, boop, boop. Beautiful. Look at that. A check mark. Super simple. I am going to change this to white. And you're probably asking, white on this beige? And you're right. But we're going to change the background color in just a second. I might want to thicken this up a little bit, and depending on the style, you may also want to round out the caps, which is right down here, and possibly even round out the joints as well, just so you have some nice rounded corners up here. Now, since this is the checked state, there's a lot of laughing emojis in the chat. What is happening in there? I don't know. Something's happening in there. You're all having fun. I love that. So since this is the check state, we may want to go, instead of this beige color, we may want to pull in some green. Something like that. Do we need the border? I don't know. Probably not. Maybe. Possibly. Who knows, right? Maybe we'll add a subtle border. Something like that. And with that, we have our default state. and our check state. And like I mentioned earlier, when we added a toggle state, they're automatically wired up. So if I press the play button at the top, I can now boop and boop, check on, check off. Really simply. I didn't have to go in prototype mode, didn't have to do any of that stuff. It just automatically worked, which is great. Now, we might want quite a few more recipes going down this artboard. So I'm going to go ahead and select all the elements that make up this particular ingredient and then pop them into a group. Call this ingredient. And now we have a few options. We can add all of this into a repeat grid, or we can turn it into a stack. Now we've explored stacks already, so let's go ahead and pop them all into a repeat grid. So right here at the top right-hand corner, where is it? Hold on, I'm looking for the button. Everybody together, boop. There we go, there's a little boop. Now, what is happening, right? You might be asking. I'm not asking that. I know what's happening. At the moment, when you add an element that contains a shadow into a repeat grid, it pushes the grid out a little bit so that it can compensate for the shadow. It needs to be updated. That's just the bottom line. Stacks does not do that, right? Stacks will allow, and components as well, it'll allow that shadow to bleed out while not pushing everything outwards. So keep that in mind. If you are adding a repeat grid with a shadow, it's going to push it out a little bit. And if you have that inside of a larger element with padding, it's going to push that out as well. So I think in this case, we're actually going to go back and pop it into a larger group and simply turn a stack on. And because we're using components for some elements, you can essentially get the same functionality as a repeat grid. So if I dive in here, select this one ingredient and duplicate, I can just add a few more going down this container, right? And the container in the back resizes really nicely. And then I can go through and maybe we'll do, let's say, bread, 2 slices, tomatoes, two thinly sliced, and then finally we might want an egg. This could be optional, right? And then 1 fried, or how else do you put eggs on? How else do you cook eggs for avocado toast? Do you scramble it? Probably, right? Or scrambled. And then if I hop over to Finder, we can of course put some photos of avocados. And then I think I have photos of bread somewhere. This one looks pretty good. Tomatoes. And I can zoom in on that right there. And then an egg. Boop, just like that. And I'll just make sure to center it. There we go. And because I have that component inside of all of these different ingredients, I can very easily go through and just check on any of them in any random order, check them off, all that fun stuff, right? And it looks pretty good. All right, poached over easy, hard boiled. Oh boy, there's so many. There we go. How about that? You can add an egg, do whatever you want with it. Have some fun with it. All right, so now outside of these ingredients, right at the bottom, we may want one large button. Once you've gone through and confirmed everything, you bought all your goodies, we may want a button. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw one out across here. We'll round at the corners a little bit. Now for this one, what we don't wanna do is we do not want to take on the style of this container here, this white with the shadow, because we're not using this as a button, right? So we don't want to really confuse users. So in this case, I might want to actually go with a green. Now we did use a green inside of our checked state. So maybe I'm actually going to add those colors to my document assets and try out one of them or 2 of them. That one looks pretty good. And then on the inside, let's get cooking. Let's make this a little bit larger so it's nice and visible. It is a primary CTA, so I am going to bump the weight up a little bit, a lot, we'll see. and then I might just want to switch the color over to a simple white. And if we take a look, that could work, right? 3 eggs at least. Oh, that's a lot of eggs. Although it could be good, right? Who knows? All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now, of course, we wanted this container to go all the way to the bottom. So we could either, space things out a little bit more. And to do that, and I think that's probably what we're going to do, because if you take a look at the top here, things are very squished together. So what we can do is with the entire recipe preview selected, we can turn a stack on, very similar to what we did with some of the other elements. And because not everything is spaced perfectly, there's no direct spacing. So let's try something like 16. And that's getting us there, right? We can maybe space out the ingredients a little bit more. And the nice thing about working in stacks is you can have a stack inside of a stack, and it's still going to adjust the padding and the stacks of everything outside of it, which is wonderful. Now, because these ingredients here belong to this header, I might want to pull this back just a touch, maybe pull this down a little bit. Maybe pull this down a touch as well so it's consistent with the space below it. You can also select this object here and then adjust the padding and spacing above and below very quickly, right? Pizza for me every day. I actually had pizza. I don't have it here. I actually had pizza for lunch. It was quite good. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. I might want to enlarge this a little bit more. And you're noticing again, stacking is doing its thing. If I needed to, I can always rearrange like this. Let's pull this down a touch. It's almost there, right? And then we can dive in, maybe add one more ingredient. What else do you put on avocado toast? Spices, maybe? Spices? What spices do you put on there? Everything bagel? I don't know. Here, spices. Here we go. Oops. I have to select the image. Drag that on there. I have no idea what spices you put on avocado toast. Maybe Richard knows. He had one this morning. And I'll just move that down. And look at that. We're pretty much back to where we want it to be. All right, and then the final thing we might want to add is maybe over to the right, we might want to add a very quick blurb about who this recipe is, right? Pepper and a little bit of salt. Pepper and salt, or salt and pepper, whatever. It could work. Now, to make my life a little bit easier for this section over to the right, I'm actually going to grab one of these ingredients, copy it, paste it over here. We don't need this guy. We do want the image. And let's find, I think I have a picture of a chef somewhere. I thought I did. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's in here, maybe? Ah, chefs. In the chefs folder, that would help, right? Pop that in there. And I'm going to turn padding on for this object. That way I can make this a little larger. I should have turned stacking on as well. That way I can drag that out. Now we don't need all that space over to the right, obviously, right? So I'm just going to set the padding on the right, let's say to 6 to match. Might be a little bit squishy over there. But what we might want to do is, let's say this is Chef Richard, because Richard had some avocado toast this morning. Maybe he's from Los Angeles, California. And then right above, crafted by. Let's make this a bit darker. Actually, I can probably use I didn't save that one. This one. That color right there. And then maybe so users can view more recipes by this chef, we might want a very simple button. Whoops. Like this. Something like that. Let's round it out just a little bit. We'll keep this one fairly simple. This is definitely a secondary section. Let's drop that to 4. More recipes. This isn't the greatest looking button in the world, but we're going to run with it for now. Let's make this a bit smaller. Yeah, a little bit smaller. Let's move this button up a touch. And then I can move this down to match. The spacing is definitely a little bit off. I would probably go in and fix this a touch. But you all get the idea, right? And then I can just grab this entire thing, pop it right about here, just so that that particular chef gets some recognition. It's probably a little bit too small, but you all get the idea. All right, and that's gonna wrap things up. We definitely didn't get to any of the other screens, but maybe we'll tackle that next time. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. Bernadette and Cornell and Masayu, Umacorn, Jennifer, Katya, Megan, Sam, great to see all of you. I will be back next week with another Adobe XD Masterclass in just a few moments. Kyle T. Webster is coming up with an illustration masterclass. Definitely don't want to miss that. And I'll see you all next time.